like to thank all of you for joining us here today, and again, welcome you to our webinar, our Hot Topics in Creative Nonfiction webinar, Writing About Place. And today we are offering you an interview-style webinar with our program director of our MFA program, Professor Leanna James Blackwell, and our faculty member, Mel Allen, who is also the editor of YANKEE magazine. So before I introduce our presenters, I would like to just take a moment to orient you to our online environment. My name is Jennifer Palma, and I am an Associate Director of Graduate Admissions here at Bay Path University. Underneath our welcome message, you should see a little empty questions box where you can type questions in and click send, and we will be happy to read and respond to you. We will be responding to all questions at the end of the webinar, but feel free to go ahead and type those in as we go, and certainly we will get to all of them at the end. Just a little information for all of you. Some of you may not be familiar with Bay Path University, so I'd like to give you a little bit of background information. We were established in 1897, and we have a long history of providing educational opportunities for both women and men throughout the United States and internationally with our graduate programs. We offer traditional four-year undergraduate programs at our on-campus location in Longmeadow, as well as degree completion programs for adult women, both online and on campus. And you can see a little photo here of our place in Longmeadow, where we have a thriving campus. We offer over 30 graduate programs for and certificates, many of them available during the evening and online. And our online programs have no residency requirement. We do offer, many of you may be familiar with our MFA in Creative Nonfiction Writing. It's a 39-credit, fully online program, as I said, with no residency requirement. And finally, we are accredited by the New England Commission of Higher Education, or fully accredited by the regional body as a higher education institution in New England. And just a couple notes about Bay Path University. Our students receive a great deal of personalized attention throughout our admissions process and during their time and experience here as a student. Our professors are both practitioners and faculty and bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the classroom. And they're totally committed to giving our students the best support and encouragement throughout their time here at Bay Path University. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to our two professors today, Leanna James Blackwell, our program director, and of course our special guest today, Mel Allen. So Leanna?
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you everybody who's joining us here today. Mel and I have been looking forward to this for quite some time. I'd like to start by introducing Mel. For those of you who don't know about his background, he is the 5th editor of YANKEE magazine since its beginning in 1935, and his career at YANKEE spans nearly 40 years, during which time he's edited and written for every section of the magazine, including home, food, and travel. Mel is a founding faculty member of the MFA in Creative Nonfiction here at Bay Path, is the author of A Coach's Letter to His Son, and his column here in New England was 2009 and 2012 National City and Regional Magazine Awards finalist for the category column. He has also served as a feature writing judge for the National Magazine Awards for the American Society of Magazine Editors. Mel lives and writes in New Hampshire. So Mel, I'd like to start first with your background as a writer and editor. Next year marks the 40th anniversary, which is just unbelievable, of your editorial tenure at YANKEE.
Where'd I go?
No. A magazine that's justly celebrated for its travel, food, farming, and lifestyle journalism. But your work has always been about more than lifestyle writing. And in fact, you characterize the pursuit of stories as your mission, long-form stories that take readers deep into the heart of places, people, experiences, cultures, and ideas. According to your bio, you have discovered these stories by crawling into the dens of black bears, profiling astronauts, racing with a sled dog team, and once helping the author Stephen King round up his pigs for market. These examples represent just a sliver of your experiences, but I think they point to a very particular passion for tracking down the stories unique to a place and time. So you have a remarkable career, Mel. I wonder, but could you talk about your beginnings? For somebody contemplating a career like yours, when did you discover this passion? How did you develop it?
I can't hear you, Leanna.
Oh, you can't? Okay, I've unmuted myself, but I'll tell you what. Let me up let me up the volume. Can you hear me now? Okay. Mel, how about that? Is that any better? I'll tell you what. Mel, if you're having trouble hearing me, I'll repeat the question for Jen, and maybe she can, if you can hear her better. I'm not sure if others are having this issue. My mic is unmuted, so we should be okay.
Yeah, Leanna, this is Jen. I can hear you just fine. And maybe, Mel, can you hear me?
Okay, I'm guessing we're having, it could be a little bit of a headset issue, which we did test out and which worked beautifully. Of course it did, 5 minutes ago. So let's see if I can reach Mel on email. Just take a moment and see if there's, maybe we just need to try it without the headset, and that might help us. So let me just shoot Mel quick email. If you can all just, thank you so much for being patient. We'll figure this out, don't worry. And try it again. Okay. Can't hear me. Okay. Email sent. Let's see if that helps. And back in the webinar. So.
Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. All of us on the webinar today are in different locations, so we're coordinating, so there's a little delay in this. Mel, if you can hear me at all and you can't hear, you can hear us, but we can't hear you, you can also try to log out and log back on, and sometimes that will solve the problem.
That's true. We've had that happen once before. We do test it always before we do a webinar. We tested yesterday and tested again before. So it could be something about the connection in New Hampshire that just happened. So we can wait and see. But thanks all so much for your patience. Mel has so much to say, so I'm eager to get him back in here so we can hear more about his beginnings, which I know a little bit about, but not all. And so looking forward to hearing everything that he has to say. Okay. So I don't see a response from Mel in email, so I'm sure that he's still trying to get his headset working. I suggested that he just try taking it off. I'll tell you what, if he's not hearing either of us, I'll send another quick email and suggest that he just log back on and off again. Okay. I'm sorry for the sound of typing. Here we go. Okay. So thank you. I know some of you are joining us at your lunch hour. So maybe this is the time to run out and get get your quick Diet Coke or whatever you drink, a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and come back and join us. I'm sure we'll work this out. So we'll just hang in there. Mel is a very resourceful person, and he also does Zoom seminars with his course. Our courses are all online, and Mel teaches a live seminar. So some of our instructors teach what they call asynchronously, which means that people log in whenever they can, and they post their responses to readings, and they post their work for workshopping. And other instructors like Mel always meet in a live seminar once a week using, it works a lot like Skype. It's a Zoom seminar, and some of you are already using Zoom and familiar with it, but for those of you who aren't, it's a lot like Skype. And so he chats with his students. They all log in from wherever they are, and we have students all over the country doing this in the Zoom, and those classes work beautifully. So we're going to try and reset it. All right. So it looks like Mel, we forgot a message. That's fantastic. So it looks like he's trying to reset it and is going to log back in again. So again, thanks for your patience. And we'll just hang on and give Mel a second.
Mel, is that you, Jennifer?
Okay, Jennifer, I took off my head. All of a sudden, there was a click when Leanna had just started introducing me, and then everything went silent. I could see a slide, and that was it.
Okay, well, we're still on the line here, so we're so glad that you were able to log back in, and now all we need is for Leanna to log back in, and I think we can resume.
So,
Leanna, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right.
So Jennifer and Leanna and everybody, I took off my headset. Can you hear me okay this way without the mic?
Yep,
Yes, I
sounds
can.
great.
But here's what I think happened. I think because of the snowstorm, I think there was like a quick little, like a momentary blackout, and I think it disconnected us, but yet I could still see. Anyway, I'm ready to go. I'm really sorry to everybody who hung in there.
Not a problem, Mel. I had a feeling it was something like that because you had mentioned the snow when we were on earlier trying to get up the hill to your office. So I thought, I'll bet it's a weather-related thing. That's so New England. So
So
here we are, and thank you everybody for hanging in. Mel, I had given a long introduction to you and got to the point where the first question is, when did you discover your passion for stories, finding stories, writing stories, and how did you develop it?
that's a really good question. I want to first thank Bay Path, and thank all of you who hung in there with this delay. And I know that some of you have been in my classes. I'm really delighted to kind of know that you're out there. So Leanna, I think it's really rare, frankly, to find anyone who devotes a lifetime to writing and editing and teaching and just being immersed in this world of ours, that we bring stories to readers, who was not that child who came home from the local library always weighed down with books. And when you read incessantly as a kid, your imagination fires up, and that was me. And also, I was also fortunate. I grew up in two worlds, and they were so different that I became really, really sensitive to what we call a sense of place today. My mother, Adele, she was raised on the island of Jamaica, and she was born in England, and before its independence, the island belonged to England. And so her father moved the family from England to Jamaica when she was a child, and he owned a textile business on the island. And my dad met her during World War II when he was stationed on an army base outside of Kingston. This is not just my biography, it actually connects to the question. And he was a son of a poor Russian immigrant who, at the turn of the century, had settled in a really downtrodden part of Philadelphia. He had a secondhand dry goods store and used clothing, and the family all lived above the store. It's one of those like immigrant stories. Just think of parts of New York City that way. So in contrast, my mom's Jamaican family was really well-to-do. There was a chauffeur, there was a cook, there was household staff, there was hired hands who daily killed the pigeons and the chickens that my grandfather raised. There were figs to pick, there were mangoes and avocados to pick. That house had pillars. There was a sweeping veranda. There were these great gardens. And in that house, there had been 5 children. All the children had left, and all these books were there. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of books, hundreds of adventure books, Robert Louis Stevenson, Kipling, Zane Grey, whatever people read in the 1920s and 1930s, they were on those shelves. And I had no friends in Jamaica, so every summer, because I had to be there, I just read everything. And then when we returned at the end of the summer to this little tiny house in Pennsylvania that was built after the war, that my dad bought for like $5,000, was on this little quiet street where you caught fireflies, rode bikes in the road. Every Friday, the Amish eggman would come to deliver eggs. It's very uniquely like American experience that was so different from the summer. And then every few weeks, we'd go see my father's father, that Russian immigrant who spoke very little English. We'd gather in that little tight space above the store that was filled with all these old clothes. Then come summer, off I'd go again. This very exotic Caribbean island where the help called me master, where the cook, Sarah, smoked cigars, where my grandfather played backgammon on the veranda at dark, and all the men were speaking very loudly as they drank their whiskey. They spoke in Arabic, they spoke in French, and you can see all these lights up in the hillsides. So my long answer is I grew up being really acutely aware of looking at places and really understanding intuitively how places felt different. So in terms of how I use that, I only had 2 ambitions growing up. One was to be a professional baseball player. Alas, that was not to be. The second was to be a writer. So growing up, I always assumed it would be fiction. I'd write the stories that had held me on all those endless Jamaican afternoons. At age 9 or 10, I was a kid who put out a neighborhood newspaper that was printed on a little kid's printing press. I sold it door to door, all through school. From elementary through high school, I was the one who was the editor of that literary magazine. I was the editor of the school newspaper. That just kind of a typical kind of a ladder that one follows when they want to be a writer. And then in high school, I actually took summer creative writing courses when I was like a junior, sophomore in high school. And I did that because I really wanted to, not because I needed any course requirements. Then I went to college. I was the first class at the Newhouse School of Journalism at Syracuse. And I went there thinking I was going to major in creative writing, but I got persuaded by the advisor that journalism would be a smarter choice. But my true education at Syracuse came simply, I had a column in the daily paper. I became managing editor of an independent weekly. And Leanna, the Newhouse School Library was where I learned to write. There were newspapers from around the country. These were the great New York columnists. It was Jimmy Breslin. It was the Washington Post. I'd never read the New Yorker before that. And here was Lillian Ross and Jane Kramer and E.B. White and all these legendary writers just by going down to the library and spending these hours going through the stacks. I discovered a writer named W.C. Hines, who's all but unknown, I think, to a young generation of writers, but he was a writer we all looked up to. I discovered Ernie Pyle's war reporting. I discovered his place writing. For several years, he traveled the country in a Ford Roadster, and he wrote about what he saw and the people he talked with, a leper colony in Hawaii, Dust Bowl farmers. He wrote about growing up as a farm boy in Indiana. I memorized some of his writing. This way you would memorize poetry. It had that same effect. And this was the heart of the Vietnam War years. And I did not serve in the armed forces, but I became a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia. I lived in Equatoria, Colombia, and the heat was so oppressive, I dreamed of snow. I'd never been to New England, but I saw a photograph of a Maine village that was draped in snow. And as soon as I returned, I was young, I was newly married, rented a car, drove to Maine, arrived in a snowstorm, became a fourth grade teacher with no experience at all. I just had to feel my way through, like walking through the woods at night. And then I became a head teacher at a very controversial school for troubled teens. They had been sent from around the country by the courts. The school used what they considered tough love. But to some of us who were there, it just seemed cruel. And luckily, I was fired. And because so many teens had run away, it was in the news. So I wrote what today we'd call an op-ed. I sent it to the Portland newspaper about what I'd witnessed. The editor liked it. He printed it. I got calls from newspapers from many different places in the country. And he asked me if I would write regularly for the feature page. So for 3 years, 3,000 word features every 2 weeks. I got $150 per story, no expenses, no subject was out of bounds. Maine became my landscape. I found the stories of people who lived in that landscape. And that's what I had to bring with me to Yankee when I finally came here. I had this whole file of stories. They were all about place and people. And in 1979, they asked me to come on and write for them. So that's a long, circuitous story about how I came to love writing, and especially writing about place.
Not circuitous at all, actually, just fascinating. And I'm struck by how much I didn't know in all these years I've known you. And I didn't know some of these stories. I didn't know about I'm fascinated by Jamaica and the library, and I can see you there in that library soaking up all the books, which actually kind of leads me to my next question about books and writers. You touched on it a little bit, the writers who have influenced you and inspired you. And when I think about writers who capture a sense of place, I'm reminded of the work of Annie Dillard, especially her classic Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which is, I remember reading it in college and being overwhelmed at its beauty and how alive the place became for me, and how interested I could be in nature writing, which had not particularly been an interest before, but it was so much more than that. And I'm also thinking of the journalist and New Yorker staff writer, John McPhee. His endless curiosity and his wide-ranging pursuit of stories reminds me of yours. And I've had that thought more than once when reading his work. I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit more about the writers that have influenced you and whom you turn to now even for inspiration?
Yeah, and even to hear my name in the same sentence with John McPhee is like, that's quite a thrilling thing. I hope that's recorded, and I will always replay that, I think. So look, John McPhee has never grown old for me. In fact, I want to mention that Annie Dillard is one of the writers that we teach in the essay writing essay writing course, because she is definitely required reading for anybody who wants to know that you can write so intimately about a place right in front of you and not have to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to make it come alive. But McPhee has never grown old for me. Pine Barrens, The Crofter and the Laird about Scotland. A sense of where you are. It's a basketball story, but it's really about a young man and his place on a basketball court at Princeton University, coming into the country, about Alaska. I mean, I devoured this stuff. I mean, John McPhee was in his heyday when I was just kind of starting to learn how to write. And the more you read of the masters, the more you let them be your mentors, the more your own voice emerges, because you get this confidence, you get this voice in your ear saying, that's what I aspire to. I want to be able to write something that people will remember the way that I remember the way John McPhee describes the characters in the Pine Barrens, for example. I discovered Joseph Mitchell, who was the New Yorker star in the 1940s, and he found a lifetime of stories in the alleys and the waterfront of New York City. He did not go out. He did not find celebrities. He did not sit down in a restaurant for a 1 hour and a half interview that would be in People magazine. He found like the king of the gypsies. He found the harbor masters. He found the waitress in a diner. That's the kind of people that he went after, and he made them basically have eternal life in the pages. I always reread Lillian Ross's reporting from the New Yorker. I not only buy for myself, but I make a point to encourage my students to always get the new annual anthologies. This to me is like a must do. There's Best American Magazine stories that are picked by the judges for the National Magazine Awards. There's an anthology called Best Travel Writing, and this is not writing about where to go have the best taco or the best best seaside hotel. This is travel writing by writers who basically are writing essays about place. There's an anthology called Best Food Writing. There's an anthology Best Science and Nature Writing. There's Best American Essays. I look for these every year, and I know that some really good editors and really good writers have already read hundreds and hundreds of these stories, and they've put between one cover, they've put maybe the 20 best of that year, and you can't go wrong that way. I read anything Chris Jones today writes, I will read. I will read Kadze Agansa, Rachel Kadze Agansa, her work. I read Tom Junod, and I find it ironic that even as print pages decline, we have such a wealth of creative nonfiction writers, men and women, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, and they are out there today writing as well as any time, I think, in American journalism.
I agree. And I get at least 2 or 3 of those anthologies every year, always mining for stories that I can assign in my courses. And I just want to linger for a moment on a beautiful point you made when you said that by studying the masters, you find your own voice, which can be a fear for some writers, that they will be influenced by another writer's voice and they will try to imitate it instead of finding their own. And I find that actually the opposite happens. By absorbing the rhythms and the consciousness of the master writers, one goes deeper into one's own self and has a better chance of expanding when you have a goal, you have a model.
Absolutely. And one thing that you can get from the best writers is you see how they structure a story, whether it's a profile, whether it's a personal essay, a memoir, whether it's a story about a place, whatever. These writers have figured out through a lot of trial and error how to begin a story, how to capture the reader's attention and hold it, and how to make the ending kind of often circle back to something that they've been driving towards from the beginning, how to kind of insert dialogue, how to all these hows that a writer has to figure out over time. These writers have figured that out, and you just have to read them enough to say, oh, now I understand how dialogue works. Now I understand what it means to not tell everything, but to leave room for the reader to feel things. I mean, that stuff gets absorbed. It doesn't happen like overnight. It's no different than when an athlete, or I take back the athlete, like an actor or an actress will study how the great actors have been on screen or on stage, and they kind of take inspiration from them, and then they find their own way to achieve what they want to achieve. I mean, that's why they have great acting studios, not to make you a robotic actor, but to find in your own spirit, in your own life, how to portray other characters. It's the same thing with writers.
You published a very moving story in Yankee recently, thinking of the point that you made about structure, about dialogue, about how to reveal when. And the story is Bucksport, Maine, the town that refused to die. I read it 2 or 3 times, Mel, and was struck by the graceful way that you wove together 3 primary themes, which were the natural ecosystem of the place, the changing economy that has devastated many rural and small-town communities, and the character of the people who live there, both collectively and individually, which is a long way of saying one important way your writing brings place to life is by highlighting the people who live in it. And I'm also thinking of several stories I've admired in recent issues, which have covered topics from the effects of climate change on New England's coast and the people who live there, to the opioid epidemic in Gloucester, to a very moving and beautiful story about a stepfather's grief at the loss of his stepson, to suicide and the writer's solace in the forests they both loved. I wonder if you could tell us more about the relationship between people and place in your own writing and in the magazine in general. And maybe a secondary question might be, is Yankee Magazine about place or about people?
Those are such great questions, Leanna. I'm going to start by, I want to tell everyone who's listening who at times may feel engulfed by the amount of and overwhelmed by the amount of material they may be getting in their own writing and their own reporting, and they feel like they're the only ones who have ever struggled like that. This story of Bucksport, Maine, was in the December issue. I spent over a week there, and I made 3 different trips, and I interviewed probably 14, 15 different people, and these were at length, some people more than others. And then for the whole time, I had like 35 to 40,000 pages of typed notes when I came home from that story. And it was a story that was evolving even as I was trying to write it. Things were changing. And I kept thinking for sure that I knew I was going to do it in a certain way. And that way was going to be the last day that the mill closed, after being around for over 80 years, I was going to follow a few characters from the mill. And then there were these people who waited for them on the very last shift, right before Christmas. This whole town turned out to kind of form this receiving line, as if it was like a wedding or something. And as the men and women came out of that mill, they were there to hug them and shake their hand and so on. And I thought I was going to set up this structure where I was going to follow the people in the mill coming out and the people who were there and tell their stories. And I thought the whole time I was going to do that. And then when I got down to try to write it, I could not make it work. There was just too much material, and weeks went by, and the deadline was approaching. And then one issue came and another issue went, and it was not in there yet. And then I kept thinking, I'm going to have to do this really difficult decision to change this way I thought I was going to do it the whole time. And then I decided I'm going to tell it just through 3 different people. And that was hard, because when people sit down with you for several hours and tell you about their life, you kind of feel somewhat beholden to them because they've given a part of their life to you, and you want them to kind of see themselves in the story. And when I made that decision, I just had to kind of just keep going. And then I wrote to everybody finally and explained in the local newspaper how I made this decision, so they would understand that it wasn't that I was just kind of not taking their stories seriously. That's one of my favorite stories, the way it finally turned out, because I do feel that I told about this very unique, well, it's not even unique today in America, because so many towns are experiencing the loss of their major, their backbone of their town. But in terms of the people, it was unique to them. They had thought the way life had been in Bucksport for 80 years was you went to high school. Usually if you were the male, you graduated high school and you went right into the mill. And they call it that. That was the term they called it. You're going into the mill as if you're going into like a different land, let's say. And I was able to tell this through 2 women and 1 man, really, basically. And that, to me, kind of typifies why we teach writing about place, because writing about place is not just describing the buildings, or describing the streets, or describing the lakes or the mountains. It's describing the way people move about in that place, because people impact a place as much as place impact people. And so to write about others effectively, you must understand the places they come from. Suzanne Strempek-Shea, who's so instrumental to Bay Path, the way that she came to my attention many, many years ago is she sent a query. And the query said, I'd like to write about Pulaski Park, a polka, where every Sunday polka bands come from all over the East and play in this park. And this is a pretty popular story I've told many times. We did not know Suzanne Strempek-Shea. She was just a young writer at the Springfield newspaper at the time. And we offered her like a finder fee for almost what it would have paid for the whole story, let's say. But we decided, instead of taking a chance on a writer we don't know, we'll send a writer who we've often worked with. That's sometimes how magazines do it, because we knew we wanted that story. And she wrote back and she says, you don't understand. I want to write this story. Thank you very much for this finder's fee, but I really want to write this because I grew up in a house overlooking the park, and I fell asleep by the lullaby of the polka music. And we saw that she was so connected to this place, that she's the one she could bring something to this story that no one else could. And she's always said that getting that story in Yankee was one of the things that gave her the confidence and the certainty that she could be a writer. And place is everything, but it's not place devoid of people. And just in my own stories over my career, Leanna, I wrote a story about Greenville, Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And Greenville, Maine, at the time was we call it like the deer hunting capital and the bush playing capital of New England. And I've always remembered the way I wrote that story was just listening to these hunters talking at these breakfasts. These are like 6 a.m. breakfasts at these diners, and they would be talking about why they were there to each other and what they hoped to do. And I remember this one description of seeing these bush planes, these planes that landed on lakes in the wilderness, and they would have these deer hanging from the struts that the hunters had shot far away from any roads. And you could see them landing on the lake with these deer tied to the struts. That description for me kind of captured what made Greenville so different. I wrote about Senator Bill Cohen, and at the time, I think when I wrote about him, he was the defense secretary of defense for Bill Clinton, and he was known for being a maverick in the Senate. He was a Republican from Maine, but he was the Republican who made the deciding vote that led Nixon to resign, because he voted for impeachment. And I want to know what were the origins of him feeling that he could this maverick streak. And he told me about growing up the son of a Jewish baker in Bangor, Maine, and the son of a Protestant mother from Aroostook County, Maine, and how he never felt that he belonged neither at one camp or the other camp. But he had gone to Hebrew school, and right before his bar mitzvah, the rabbi told him, totally unbeknownst, that for him to be bar mitzvahed in the Jewish faith as coming from a mixed marriage where his mother was not Jewish, he was going to have to undergo some kind of procedure. I believe, frankly, it was circumcision. And he, at that day, he said he knew then that he was not going to do that, and he was not going to belong anywhere. And he went down to the river, the Penobscot River in Bangor. He took off this necklace, and the necklace had a mezuzah on it, which is like a holy Jewish object, and he threw it into the river. By telling me about that, and I had already gone to the bakery with his father at 4 a.m, and his father had told me all these stories about going to Little League games and his son, people jeering him because he was Jewish and yelling these epithets at him. I knew how the place had influenced him, and I knew that the person that he became was because of the way he grew up. And I believe that actually is part of everything that I write, is I want to know, what were you like growing up? How did the place affect you? It's not by chance that so many profiles by really good writers start with place. The ones I even give to my students just this semester. One of them was about the writer Elizabeth Strout, and it starts with just outside the town of Brunswick, Maine. The Harpswell Road runs along a finger of land poking into the ocean. It passes clapboard houses and mobile homes, stands of red-tipped sumac and pine, a few farms, a white congregational church, and the Harpswell Historical Society, which used to be Bailey's Country Store when the writer Elizabeth Strout worked there as a teenager. And then it quotes Elizabeth Strout remembering that. I give If He Hollers, Let Him Go as a recommended reading. It's a profile of Dave Chappelle by Rachel Kadzigansa, and it starts, although the city of Dayton is small and has been hit hard by the decline of industry, the land is green, fecund, and alive, even in the relentless heat of summer. And then she talks about the Black College, where that kind of is at the center of this town. All these writers understand that people and place are interconnected, just like breathing.
It makes me think of the GM workers, now that we've got the news about the plants closing, the stories that are going to be there with these men and women who are no longer going to be working at the plant and won't have jobs after lifetimes, after fathers and grandfathers and parents working there. It reminds me very much, and I thought of your article, The Town That Refused to Die, when I read that news and wondered about the stories that we're going to hear coming out of there. And
Leanna, sorry, go ahead.
That's, yes, how the people, how the culture of the plant influenced place and vice versa, how they were shaped by that. And their sense of place would be dominated by the plant and its longevity, and the fact that it's not there anymore is going to change things dramatically, and nobody can know. And it seems to me important to capture those stories at this time, just like you did. You went to Bucksport, and what you were talking about the other place in Ohio and how she opened that. And I wonder, Mel, when we're talking about good place-based writing, you get a lot of queries and you work with a lot of writers. Are there things that you always look for when you're looking at a piece of writing that is trying to give readers a sense of place?
Absolutely. You look for, first of all, can I see it? Can I get a sense of people who are walking its streets? And especially, Leanna, do I trust that the writer has immersed herself long enough in a place to have really caught the feel and the sense of what makes it different from another place? For example, I'm not looking for someone who lands there on a Friday, leaves on a Sunday, and then writes about where she ate and a walk that she took, and maybe a meal or two that she ate, or a museum that she went to. And if there's no voices in it, if I don't get a sense that there are people who are living in this other than just a writer who's kind of landing as a tourist for a few days, that to me belongs somewhere else. It's not what I'm looking for. And I do worry about that's almost the epidemic, let's say, of travel blogs and the Instagram generation that think that really qualifies as a sense of place. I mean, I know that there are Instagrammers who have 150,000, 200,000 followers, and they go to a place, or they're connected to a place. Like there's one just in New England, and they have tens of thousands of followers in Japan because they create a dream-like New England, for example. There are Instagrammers who are trying to show this perfect kind of world, and so the sun is always shining, it's always blue, the dogs are always jumping on them and so on.
Right.
And I worry that serious writers, like in the Bay Path program, could possibly get infected if they're not careful, thinking that is writing, or that is place-based communication, because it's not. And what I do want the writer to do is show me that they are the ones to write about this place because they have a feel for it, or they've developed a feel for it, or they know it, or they spent the time, they even spent the time to walk into the library and say, to the librarian, who almost always is either from there or has roots there or has developed roots there and so on, and say, tell me about X town. What makes this place, what makes it different from somewhere else? Not just, you know, okay, tell me where there's the best burger. And I say that knowing that it could possibly sound hypocritical to people listening in, because if they know Yankee, they know we do have travel stories where we're telling you where to get the best burger. And I get that. And it's kind of been leaching into all magazines everywhere, where true great place writing is replaced by what I call the go-see-do kind of thing. And I'm not looking for go-see-do. I'm looking for stories about place and people that make me stop and just go, wow, that is really fascinating. Remember earlier, I said that I discovered Ernie Pyle when I was in college. And I don't know who reads Ernie Pyle today, because he's been gone since the early 40s when he was killed in World War II. But this is a column that I actually memorized at one time. I wrote it out today for this class because I can't say that all these years later I knew it. But listen to how he's from Indiana. Now listen to how he described this. Look, and who could not feel that you were in the hands of a guide and you want to follow this person? It starts, I don't know whether you know that long, sad wind that blows so steadily across the thousands of miles of Midwest flatlands in the summertime. If you don't, it'll be hard for you to understand the feeling I have about it. To me, the summer wind in the Midwest is one of the most melancholy things in all of life. It comes from so far, and it blows so gently and yet so relentlessly. It rustles the leaves and the branches of the maple trees in a sort of symphony of sadness. It doesn't pass on and leave them still. No, it just keeps coming on. And that, I memorized that as if it was poetry. And I know the prologue to James Agee's A Death in the Family, and it's called Knoxville, 1915. I read that over and over and over for the musicality of it. Even though it's a novel, it's really a memoir novel. And he's writing about what he remembered being a child in Knoxville in 1915. And I bring that up because I always start when I'm doing a profile and I'm interviewing somebody, I always start with that simplest question: tell me about where you grew up. And then I'll talk, and then I'll say things like, and I want them to get as concrete as possible with the sensory things. What did you see from your bedroom window? What did the kitchen smell like on a Sunday if your mom was cooking a special dinner? What did your friends play when you went out to play at night? What were you afraid of when you were 6 years old? I mean, those kind of questions get people talking, and what they're doing is they're revealing important things about who they became later on, because you're not interviewing them about being 6 years old. Wherever you're doing this profile on, you're doing it because it's something that they're doing now, most likely as an adult, unless you're Susan Orlean, who can turn a 10-year-old kid into a great piece of writing, which she did.
Yes, we can.
That wonderful piece she did that we taught in our class this semester on writing about others. But that's what I look for. And I just came back from MacDowell Colony, which is a great arts colony here in Peterborough, probably the foremost. And I'm doing it we have a TV show called Weekends with Yankee, and so they're filming an episode there, and I was like the guide for the film crew. But so I interviewed the colonists, and during the time that I was there, I saw this guy. His name is Blake, and for over 30 years, he's been loading up a truck with these picnic baskets, which is one of the things that MacDowell Colony is so famous for, Leanna, is you are in this private studio, and the picnic every day at noon. There's a picnic basket placed on your door. Nobody knocks, so there's no interruption whatsoever from 9 o'clock in the morning to when you go to dinner. And this picnic, and this one person for over 30 years has been the person delivering these picnic baskets. So I thought, I want to know about him. So I made a point of, before I left, I sat down with him and I interviewed him, and I heard this story. Now and I didn't know when I went into this, I was going to learn this story, but I know, and now I'm going to write about MacDowell for Yankee, and I'm going to include his story, absolutely. He told me about every day he would deliver this picnic basket to the doorstep of a painter, a young woman. And every day she became increasingly anxious because her work was not going well. I mean, think of the pressure. You've now gotten this very prestigious fellowship to go for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 5 weeks, to go to this McDowell colony where they're going to take care of all your needs, and you have been waiting maybe months to work on this whatever project that you go there to work on, and she has a painter's block, just like writer's block, and every day he would say to her, it's going to come to you, it's going to come to you. And he took her that little famous children's story, The Little Engine That Could, and he gave it to her, and then every day he would see her at somewhere on the campus, and he would say, I know you can, I know you can, I know you can. And then finally, when she left, she gave him a painting that she had done while she was there. And she said that he had been the reason she was able to go on with her work. Now that to me tells about place, it tells about people, it tells about interactions, it tells about how inspiration happens, and you don't stumble upon that unless when you go somewhere, you observe, you keep your eyes open, you listen, and you just kind of look around and you absorb it.
That's a beautiful story, Mel. And who would have thought to have interviewed and spent time with the man who delivers the baskets, and yet look what you got, a treasure. I'm aware of our time, Mel, and we want to make sure that everyone has enough time for questions. So we're going to skip ahead, which is actually fine because the additional questions I had for you, you already addressed. So thank you. You talked about technique. You talked about what students should look for. You talked about the elements of good place-based writing, and you talked about where you can do place-based writing, which can be in your own backyard. It can be where you grew up. So if we could just go to the questions slide and talk about what others might want to know who are on this call, and we will give time if you haven't had a chance to type in your question. We'll pause for a moment. Please feel free to do so now. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I know we want to address as many as we can. So, Jen, can you let us know if we've had any come in so far?
We have a couple questions which have come in so far, and I'm going to go ahead and read them exactly as they were written. They're a little, one of them's a little bit lengthy, but I think that's great. So I will go ahead and read it, and then Leanna or Mel or both can choose to chime in as you wish.
Okay.
So we have one person who said, with some 30 plus vacations in Europe over 3 decades, I'm a retiree interested in writing about those places and the special events during the Advent and Christmas season in Germany and Austria, which we experienced. Can you suggest a possible way to gain readership of such writing?
Okay, Mel, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Well, it sounds like you've been these places many times. So the first thing I would ask, I would want, like if a writer had come to me with this and this was a place that we covered, I would say, did you keep a journal by any chance? Do you have do you have material that would be kind of unique to your experience? So it's not just something an editor can go and click on a link and on the web and find that. So the place you find something like that is who writes about those kind of places. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is airline magazines. Airline magazines are all about place because you are trapped on that airline and you are flying somewhere. So who flies to the places that you're writing about? Is it United? Is it Lufthansa? Whoever, they all have their own magazines, and they are always looking for stories about the places that that they fly to.
Thank you, Mel.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, let's see. I have another question. What advice would you give to an aspiring columnist? What do you see as the keys to successful columns? What are the strengths of the successful columnist? And are there still homes in the print world for new, strong columns?
Thank you. Mel, how about it?
You know, and I'm not being glib when I say this, but there's nothing more important than to say to a columnist, do you have something to say that people want to hear? That's as simple as that. If you have a viewpoint and you have your own voice and your own viewpoint, there are columns today. If you just look at the Washington Post, if you look online, they have columnists who I'd never heard of even just five years ago, like Alexandra Petrie, for example, and she writes like a kind of a satire column. And in today's world, when you say a column, we have to distinguish it, a column and a blog post. There are some wonderful blog posts that really are columns. And then sometimes people, frankly, they start their own WordPress blog, and they have their own audience. Ben Hewitt is a columnist for Yankee magazine. His column is called Life in the Kingdom. He's a homesteader in Vermont, and every issue he writes about what it's like to make the decision to kill animals for meat for his family, animals that he's actually gotten really attached to, and about building his own home and is he going to have it ready in time for the winter and so on. But he also has his own website blog post about living on that farm. He has a unique experience that he has followers who want to know about. So if you have things to say, and if you feel too frustrated by trying to place it, I would say you make your own column online.
Thank you, Mel. Jen,
Thank you so much. Yes, and that's a perfect segue to the next question. The question is, I am not a writer by trade, but I have stories to tell. What advice would you give to someone who wants to share stories to help inspire others?
Well, it's a little bit like nobody's going to know your stories unless you send them out. Every class I've ever taught, first at University of Massachusetts for 12 years and now happily at Bay Path, I always say at the beginning of the course, our goal is to send out what we end up doing, our final version of a major piece. You send it out. So what you do, and I don't know how familiar you are with the publishing world, but every library has a book that's usually called the Writer's Handbook, and it's the writer's guide to, there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of publishers in there, magazines, newspapers, whatever, and you see the ones that interest you and you send it out. Or you simply go to if you live in a town where there's a weekly newspaper, maybe you're not going to get a lot of money for the writing, but it will reach readers. I mean, we have a weekly newspaper right here in the Monadnock region of New Hampshire, and I think there's 6 different columnists in that paper, and they're all one's writing about family life, one's writing about birding, one's writing about nature in general, and so on.
Great, thank you so much. We have 2 more questions, and I think we have time for them. The first one is, what if a subject won't talk about their childhood or where they grew up? What would you recommend then?
Good question. Mel?
I've actually never had that happen, because you'll find, no, I'm going to think that maybe where this question is coming from is maybe the questioner may know people who've had sensitive childhoods. I mean, I had a student last semester who had a very traumatic childhood, but that childhood is part of what I think made her the wonderful writer that she is today. Now, if I was doing a profile of that person and I asked about that, and she doesn't know me, she might say, I don't really want to talk about that. And then what you have to do is just gain their trust by being a really good listener for the next 2 hours. And then once this person trusts you, or maybe you come back a second time, I've really never done a profile of anybody of any length without going back 2 or 3 times. And it's a relationship that builds up over time. And then at some point you do need to find out, is there a reason you don't want to talk about that? And because otherwise it's like this big vacant history, and the reader's only going to meet the person like when they're 40 years old or 50 years old and know nothing about them. And the person they are at 40 or 50 is in part because of who they were at 6 and 7.
Great.
I would add just briefly to that, Mel, you gave an example earlier about the kind of specific question you might ask someone about their childhood, which was, what were you afraid of when you were 6 years old? And sometimes that kind of specificity can help when childhood as a kind of genre of itself is overwhelming. But something like, tell me about your favorite teacher when you were a child. Tell me about a favorite place you like to play.
Great
Those
point.
can sometimes open it up a little bit when the idea of trauma in childhood is too much. And gradually, as Mel says, by earning the trust, you can get a little closer. Well, time for one last question. Thanks, Jen.
One last question is what we have, so that's great. How does one start out as a travel writer out of college?
The way that you start as a college is you go travel and you write something that an editor really wants. And you write about something, again, don't write about, okay, let's use an example. If you come to New England, let's say you're at a college and you want to write about New England. Well, you don't write about the New England that everyone else has written about. You find a way in that's going to be different, and learn the craft, so you don't say like quaint, but use concrete details and show us what quaint might look like. And you find places, frankly, you find places that maybe other travel writers have not found. Let's say almost like a niche, let's say, that editors will want. So maybe if you're truly adventurous, maybe you'll go to parts of, like, if I were just starting out college right now and I want to be a travel writer, I might think of going to South America or Latin America, because there's so much in the news about the desperate migrants. So where are they coming from? Why are they on the move? What is it really like in Mexico? I mean, and is that travel, is that place? Well, it's place writing with sensitivity. And it's not, again, just about where you're going to go to eat and where you're going to stay, but you're immersing yourself in a place and you're letting readers know and understand why this place is important. And there's a lot of people out there who are writing, let's say, travel blogs right now. And that's, again, another way to do it is if you go and just look online and you write travel blogs, you're going to see there's hundreds of people who are doing that. And some of them are actually being paid to do that. They're called influencers, and people pay them to go places. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about you becoming one of the good, strong place writers. And so go to where people want to know about, and they don't even know that they want to know about them yet.
Excellent advice. Mel, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. There's so much more that we could talk about, so we're going to have you back. That's all there is to it.
I am so sorry to everyone for delaying this for 10 minutes for some technical glitch because of snow. But I would love to come back because I have 40 years of wanting to talk about this stuff, and it's good to do it.
Well, let's do it. We'll schedule a follow-up, and we'll let everyone know. In the meantime, if you have any questions at all about the MFA, you're welcome to reach out to me at this email address, and it will be forwarded to me, and I'll get it. If you're interested in studying with Mel, or if there are any follow-up questions as a result of this webinar that you didn't get a chance to ask, and Mel and I can talk about it and get an answer back to you. So thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you, Mel, and thank you, Jen. A pleasure.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, again. Bye-bye.
Oh, I'm so sorry about